Adults only at this table, my older sister announced. You can sit with the kids since you haven't really achieved anything. My teenage daughter watched me pick up my plate. I sat with the children and smiled. After dinner, I handed my sister an envelope. Your mortgage holder wanted me to deliver this personally. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the dining room as I arrived at my sister Victoria's house for Thanksgiving dinner. My daughter Autumn, 15 and fiercely loyal, carried the pumpkin pie I'd baked that morning. The colonial-style home sat on 2 acres in an exclusive gated community, all white columns and manicured hedges that screamed old money, even though Victoria had only moved in 3 years ago. Finally, Victoria said, air kissing near my cheeks without making contact. Her perfume cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and she made sure everyone knew it. We were about to start without you. My brother-in-law Keith appeared behind her, drink already in hand despite it being only 4 in the afternoon. He managed a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. They're twins, Mason and Madison, 13 years old and already miniature versions of their parents, barely glanced up from their phones as we entered. The dining room table stretched beneath an elaborate floral centerpiece, set with china that Victoria mentioned cost $8,000 during every holiday gathering. My mother Janet sat near the head of the table, looking uncomfortable in a dress Victoria had probably bought her. Dad, Robert, stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back in that way he did when tension filled a room. Beautiful table, I offered, setting the pie on the sideboard. Victoria waved dismissively. The decorator came yesterday. I simply told her I wanted sophisticated elegance, and she executed my vision. She examined her reflection in the china cabinet glass, adjusting an earring. Some of us have developed refined tastes over the years. Autumn squeezed my hand. She'd heard Victoria's veiled insults her entire life, watched her aunt measure my worth in square footage and designer labels. My daughter knew what I did for work, understood the choices I'd made, but Victoria dismissed anything that didn't come with a prestigious title or country club membership. The house itself told the story Victoria wanted everyone to believe. Hardwood floors imported from Italy, crown molding in every room, a kitchen that could have been featured in architectural magazines. She'd given me the full tour when they first moved in, pointing out every expensive detail while somehow making each revelation feel like a comparison to my modest 3-bedroom ranch across town. That house tour had happened on a sweltering July afternoon. Victoria had insisted I see the master bathroom with its heated floors and rainfall shower. I know it must seem excessive to you, she'd said, running her hand along the marble countertop, but Keith and I believe in investing in quality. We're building generational wealth, not just getting by month to month. I'd smiled and complimented the fixtures while Autumn explored the backyard with the twins. What Victoria didn't know was that I'd already started reviewing property records in her neighborhood, analyzing market trends, studying mortgage portfolios that might come available. Not because I planned to hurt her, but because understanding the full picture of someone's finances had become second nature to me. My career transformation hadn't been linear or easy. After Autumn's father left when she was 2, I'd been terrified and working as a bookkeeper for a small manufacturing company. The pay covered rent and groceries with little left over. My boss, an older woman named Dorothy, noticed me studying accounting textbooks during lunch breaks. "You're too smart for data entry," Dorothy had said one afternoon, sitting down across from me in the break room. "Why aren't you getting your CPA?" "Time and money," I'd answered honestly. "I'm a single mom. There aren't enough hours in the day." Dorothy had pulled some strings, connected me with a night program at the community college, even helped arrange my schedule so I could attend classes. It took me 4 years of studying after Autumn went to bed, of practicing exam questions while she did homework at the kitchen table, of sacrificing every weekend and spare moment. Victoria had rolled her eyes at family gatherings when I'd arrived tired, dismissing my exhaustion as poor time management. The CPA certification opened doors I hadn't known existed. I moved to a larger firm, started working with high net worth clients, learned how wealth actually worked versus how people pretended it worked. One client, an elderly investor named Frank, took me under his wing during his final years. He taught me about mortgage-backed securities, real estate investment trusts, the hidden world of loan portfolio acquisitions. "Most people think mortgages stay with the bank that issued them," Frank had explained, his weathered hands spreading documents across his desk. "They don't understand that their loan is an asset that gets bought and sold. Smart investors know how to acquire performing loans at the right price and build steady income streams. When Frank passed away, he left me a small inheritance with a note: build something that matters. Help people while building security for your daughter. I'd used that seed money to start my investment company, working nights and weekends while maintaining my day job, slowly building a portfolio of residential mortgages purchased from banks looking to liquidate assets. Victoria had known none of this. At family gatherings, she'd ask what I did with a tone that suggested my answer wouldn't be interesting. Still doing bookkeeping? She'd say, already turning away before I could respond. I'd stopped trying to explain, stopped attempting to share my accomplishments with someone determined not to see them. Where should we sit? I asked. Victoria surveyed the table as though seeing it for the first time. Keith had already claimed his seat at the head, and Victoria positioned herself to his right. Mom and Dad occupied the middle section. The twins sprawled across 2 chairs, bags and jackets piled on a third. Actually, Victoria announced, her voice cutting through the pre-dinner chatter, I've decided this year we're having an adults-only main table. She gestured toward a card table set up near the kitchen doorway, barely visible from where the main celebration would occur. 2 folding chairs flanked it, and the plates were the everyday stoneware, not the precious china. You can sit with the kids since you haven't really achieved anything. The room went silent. Even Keith looked surprised, though he said nothing, taking a long drink instead. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. Dad turned from the window, his jaw tight. Victoria, Mom started, but my sister held up one perfectly manicured hand. I'm simply being practical, Mother. We're discussing adult matters today. Keith's promotion, Madison's acceptance into the elite academy, our expansion plans for the lake house. It doesn't really make sense to include, she paused, looking at me with manufactured sympathy, everyone. Autumn's face flushed red. She opened her mouth, but I touched her shoulder gently. It's fine, sweetheart. Mom, no, Autumn whispered. This is ridiculous. I picked up my plate and silverware, the everyday stoneware feeling light in my hands. We'll be perfectly comfortable over here. I smiled at my daughter, that same calm smile I'd worn through years of Victoria's carefully calculated cruelties. Come on, sweetie. Let's let the accomplished adults have their important conversation. Mason looked up from his phone, confusion crossing his face. Aunt Natalie doesn't have to, Mason, Victoria said sharply. Focus on your meal. The card table wobbled when I set my plate down. Autumn sat across from me, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. From our position, I could hear every word at the main table but felt completely separated, like watching a play through a window. The segregation stung in ways Victoria probably didn't fully grasp. This wasn't just about seating arrangements or holiday drama. This was the culmination of years of subtle and not-so-subtle messages that I didn't measure up, that my life choices had been failures, that raising Autumn alone without remarrying somehow made me less complete. I thought about the Christmas 5 years ago when Victoria had given Autumn a gift card to a discount store while presenting Madison and Mason with the latest gaming systems. I figured you guys need practical things, she'd said with false sympathy. Autumn had been 10, old enough to understand the disparity, young enough for it to wound deeply. We'd left early that night, and I'd held my crying daughter in the car. Why does Aunt Victoria hate us? Autumn had asked through tears. She doesn't hate us, I'd said, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. She's just lost sight of what matters. Some people measure everything by price tags and forget about value. That night I'd made a decision. I would never let Victoria's narrow definition of success make my daughter feel less than. I would build something substantial, not for revenge or validation, but to give Autumn security and to prove to myself that I could thrive on my own terms. The investment company became my focus, my mission, my redemption project. The work had been grueling. Mortgage acquisition required understanding complex financial instruments, legal structures, risk assessment models. I'd spent countless hours learning the intricacies of loan servicing, foreclosure laws, refinancing protocols. My small company started with 3 mortgage purchases, small residential properties in emerging neighborhoods. As those performed well, I reinvested, acquiring larger portfolios. Frank's lessons proved invaluable. He taught me to look for loans that were current but possibly vulnerable, properties where owners had overleveraged or where income stability might be questionable. Not to exploit people, but to offer them better terms than they might get elsewhere while ensuring stable returns for my investors. It was ethical lending with a human face, something the big banks rarely provided. My company grew quietly, without fanfare or publicity. I hired 2 staff members, both women who'd been underestimated in traditional financial roles. Together we built a reputation for fair dealing and flexibility. When borrowers faced hardship, we worked with them. When they wanted to refinance, we offered competitive rates. The business model worked because it prioritized sustainability over maximum profit extraction. Victoria's mortgage came across my desk during a routine portfolio review. A regional bank was liquidating assets after a merger, and their residential loan package included 15 mortgages in upscale neighborhoods. I recognized Victoria's address immediately, felt my pulse quicken as I reviewed the terms. The loan was current but showed recent stress patterns. 2 late payments in 6 months, 1 bounce check that had been covered within the grace period. I'd sat in my office that evening after everyone else had gone home, Victoria's loan file open on my desk. The ethical questions swirled through my mind. Was this conflict of interest? Was I crossing a line between business and personal? I called my attorney, Richard, a shrewd man who'd guided me through numerous complicated decisions. "The loan is performing," Richard had said after reviewing the details. "You're not doing anything predatory by acquiring it. In fact, given your track record, she'd probably be better off with you holding the note than a faceless corporation." He paused. "The question is whether you can maintain professional boundaries with a family member." "I can," I'd assured him, and I'd meant it. I purchased the portfolio, including Victoria's mortgage, as a straight business transaction. For 18 months, I'd held the loan quietly, watching the payments, noting the increasing financial stress but never interfering. Victoria had no idea that her monthly mortgage check came to my company, processed by my staff, deposited into accounts I managed. The knowledge had given me a strange sense of calm during subsequent family gatherings. When Victoria bragged about her investments or made dismissive comments about my career, I knew the reality behind her facade. The financial pressure building in her carefully curated life, the adjustable rate that would reset soon, the lifestyle inflation that Keith's anticipated promotion was supposed to support but hadn't materialized yet. I hadn't wanted to use this knowledge as a weapon. Honestly, I'd hoped Victoria might soften on her own, that maturity or self-reflection might temper her need to diminish others. But as Thanksgiving approached and she'd called to warn me that this year's gathering would be more sophisticated and adult-focused, I'd sensed another humiliation brewing. "I just want to make sure you understand the tone," Victoria had said on the phone. "We're having important discussions this year. Keith's career advancement, the children's academic achievements. It might not be relevant to everyone's situation." The subtext had been clear as crystal. This gathering would feature another public reminder of my supposed inadequacy, another performance of Victoria's superiority. I'd ended the call and pulled out Victoria's loan file, studying it carefully. The envelope I prepared contained foreclosure warnings and default notices, not because I intended to use them, but because I wanted Victoria to see how close to the edge she actually was before I offered her a lifeline. Autumn had helped me plan what to wear, how to respond if Victoria created a scene. My daughter had inherited my patience but also my strategic mind. "Kill her with kindness," Autumn had suggested. "Let her make herself look bad, then show everyone who you really are." Smart kid. She understood that dignity under fire spoke louder than any defensive argument. Victoria launched into a story about their recent trip to the Maldives, how the resort had upgraded them because Keith knew someone who knew someone. She described the water villa in excruciating detail, mentioning the cost per night 3 separate times. Mom picked at her food. Dad hadn't touched his. "Must be nice," I murmured to Autumn, having so much to brag about. My daughter shook her head. "She's awful. I don't understand why you put up with this." "Because family is complicated," I said, cutting into the turkey that Victoria's caterer had prepared. "And because sometimes people need to learn lessons in their own time." The truth was more nuanced than I could explain while sitting at that card table. Family wasn't something you could simply walk away from, at least not for me. Mom and Dad were aging, and I didn't want our family gatherings to become battlegrounds where people had to choose sides. Victoria was still my sister, despite everything. We'd shared a childhood, played together in our backyard, stayed up late telling secrets when we were young. Something had shifted in Victoria during college. She'd attended a prestigious university, joined the right sorority, dated men from wealthy families. She'd come home for breaks wearing designer clothes and speaking differently, her accent polished and her vocabulary peppered with references to places and things I'd never experienced. The distance between us had grown with each passing year. I'd attended state school, worked part-time to afford tuition, graduated with decent grades but no elite network. When I'd gotten pregnant at 23, Victoria had been scandalized. "You're throwing your life away," she'd said when I told her I was keeping the baby. "Nobody successful has kids that young anymore." But Autumn had been the best decision I'd ever made. Watching her grow, teaching her to read, helping her navigate friendships and school challenges, celebrating her accomplishments, motherhood had given my life purpose and joy that Victoria's material success never seemed to provide. My daughter was kind, thoughtful, resilient. She made me proud every single day. Victoria's twins, by contrast, were achievements to be displayed rather than children to be nurtured. She enrolled them in every prestigious activity, hired tutors and coaches, managed their schedules like a corporate executive managing departments. Madison and Mason were accomplished but seemed hollow, going through motions without genuine passion. I'd never heard Victoria ask them what made them happy, only what would look good on future college applications. "You know what's funny?" Autumn said quietly, pulling me from my thoughts. "Mason told me last summer that he wishes their family was more like ours. He said our house feels peaceful." "Did he really say that?" Autumn nodded, pushing green beans around her plate. "He said he's tired of everything being a competition. That his mom cares more about how things look than how they actually are." She glanced toward the main table where Madison sat scrolling through her phone while Victoria talked. "I think they're really unhappy, Mom. All of them." Observing the scene from our exile, I could see what Autumn meant. Keith drank steadily throughout the meal, his smiles forced and his contributions to conversation minimal. Madison and Mason barely engaged, preferring their devices to family interaction. Victoria performed happiness, her laughter too loud and her gestures too animated, but something desperate lurked beneath the surface. Real success, I'd learned through years of working with wealthy clients, rarely looked like what Victoria was performing. The truly wealthy people I'd met through my investment work were often understated, comfortable in their own skin, unconcerned with proving anything to anyone. They drove modest cars, lived in nice but not ostentatious homes, focused on meaningful relationships rather than social positioning. Frank had been like that. Despite having accumulated significant wealth, he'd lived simply, driven a 10-year-old sedan, shopped at regular grocery stores. "Money is a tool," he told me once. "It should serve your life, not define it. The moment you start needing others to know you have money is the moment you've lost perspective." Victoria had lost perspective years ago. She'd become so invested in appearing successful that the appearance consumed her actual life. The big house came with a mortgage she could barely afford. The luxury cars had payments that strained their budget. The private schools for the twins, the country club membership, the designer wardrobe, all of it was leveraged against future income, a house of cards built on the assumption that Keith's career would keep climbing and nothing would go wrong. I'd seen this pattern in dozens of clients over the years. Lifestyle inflation, living at the edge of income, assuming good times would last forever. Then a job loss, a medical emergency, an unexpected expense, and everything collapsed. Victoria was one bad break away from serious financial trouble, though she'd never admit it. The positioning at the card table was almost poetic justice. Victoria had literally marginalized me, pushed me to the edges of the family gathering, made my exclusion visible to everyone. She'd wanted me to feel shame, to absorb the message that I didn't belong among the accomplished adults. Instead, sitting there watching her performance, I felt something closer to pity. She had so much yet seemed to enjoy so little. The beautiful house felt like a museum, everything positioned for display rather than comfort. The expensive meal came from a caterer because Victoria didn't want to spend time cooking. The family gathering itself was less about connection and more about creating an impressive scene. What was the point of all this wealth if it didn't bring actual happiness? My smaller house across town was filled with warmth and laughter. Autumn's friends loved visiting because they could relax on our furniture without worrying about damaging something precious. We cooked together, made messes, planted a vegetable garden that produced more zucchini than any family could possibly need. Our vacations were modest but memorable: camping trips, road adventures, visits to national parks. We had what economists call time affluence, the luxury of not being enslaved by possessions or appearances. The envelope in my purse felt heavy with meaning. Inside were not just mortgage documents but a mirror, a reflection of reality that Victoria couldn't ignore. I debated for weeks whether to bring it today, whether confronting her was the right choice. Part of me wanted to simply continue holding the mortgage silently, being a benevolent lender without her knowledge. But the card table had made the decision for me. Victoria's cruelty tonight crossed a line, humiliating me in front of my daughter, my parents, her own children. This wasn't subtle disparagement or veiled insults. This was overt relegation, a public declaration that I didn't deserve a place at the adult table. She'd forced my hand, and the envelope was my response. Autumn had inherited my sense of justice along with my patience. She understood that sometimes you had to stand up for yourself, that letting people walk over you wasn't kindness but enabling. "Are you going to give it to her?" she whispered. After dessert, I confirmed. "When everyone's still here to witness it." "Good," Autumn said firmly. "She needs to know she can't treat people this way." Dessert came, and Victoria served her guests first, bringing them pie and coffee on the good china. She eventually remembered the card table, bringing us dessert on paper plates with plastic forks. "I'm running low on the good stuff," she explained, not apologizing. "Paper is perfect," I said. "Easier cleanup." After dessert, while Victoria held court about Madison's elite academy and the important families they'd be networking with, I retrieved my purse from the entry hall. Inside was a manila envelope, letter-sized, with Victoria's name printed across the front. I'd been carrying it for 3 days, waiting for the right moment. The right moment had definitely arrived. "Victoria," I called from my position at the card table. "Before we leave, I need to give you something." My sister waved her hand dismissively. "Can't it wait? We're discussing Madison's curriculum. It's time-sensitive." I stood, envelope in hand, and approached the main table. Autumn followed, curiosity replacing her earlier anger. "Your mortgage holder wanted me to deliver this personally." Victoria's smile faltered. "My mortgage holder? What are you talking about?" I placed the envelope in front of her, next to her coffee cup and the remains of her pie. "I think you should open it now, with the family here." Keith leaned forward, confusion evident. "What is this?" "Open it," Dad said. He'd moved from the window and stood behind Mom's chair, his expression unreadable. Victoria tore open the envelope with less grace than she usually displayed, yanking out the papers inside. Her eyes scanned the first page, then widened. Color drained from her face. She flipped to the second page, then the third, her hands beginning to shake. "This can't be right," she whispered. "What?" Keith grabbed the papers. He read for a moment, then looked at me like he'd never seen me before. "You own our mortgage?" Autumn gasped softly beside me. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. "Not just your mortgage," I said calmly. "I've owned it for 18 months. Purchased it from the original lender through my investment company." Victoria found her voice, though it came out strangled. "Your investment company? You don't have an investment company. You're a bookkeeper." "I was a bookkeeper," I corrected. 15 years ago, when you started telling people I'd never amount to anything. Then I got my CPA certification while working full-time and raising Autumn alone. After that came the financial planning credentials, then the investment advisor licenses. I kept my voice even, factual. For the past decade, I've been building a private investment firm specializing in residential mortgage acquisition and portfolio management. We handle about $80 million in assets currently. The silence that fell over the room felt thick enough to touch. Madison and Mason both looked up from their phones. Keith's face had gone gray. Victoria stared at the papers like they might bite her. "You never said anything," Mom whispered. "I didn't need to," I replied, looking at my mother. I wasn't doing it for recognition or to prove anything. I was building security for my daughter and helping other families manage their financial futures. I turned back to Victoria. "Your loan came up for sale during a portfolio liquidation. I recognized the address and saw you were current on payments, so I made an acquisition offer." "Why?" Victoria's voice cracked. "Why would you buy my mortgage?" "Initially?" Pure business sense. The terms were favorable, and the property had appreciated significantly. You'd built substantial equity. I pulled out a chair and sat down at the main table, finally taking a seat where Victoria had forbidden me hours earlier. Autumn joined me, sitting tall. But then I started noticing some concerning patterns in the payment history over the past few months. Keith's jaw clenched. He knew exactly what I was talking about. You've been late 3 times in the last 6 months, I continued. Not drastically late, but enough to trigger penalty clauses. Your payment last month bounced initially, though you covered it within the grace period. I looked at Keith. That promotion you mentioned? When does it actually take effect? February, he admitted quietly. So you've been living above your means, anticipating income you don't have yet. I pulled out another sheet from my purse, this one showing their loan terms. Your adjustable rate resets in January. Based on current market conditions, your monthly payment will increase by approximately $1,800. Victoria made a small sound of distress. We'll manage, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Maybe, I acknowledged. Or maybe you'll fall behind, accumulate late fees, damage your credit. Maybe you'll have to sell this house you love so much, the one you've used as a measuring stick for everyone else's worth. I let that sink in. Or maybe we can renegotiate your terms. Hope flickered across Victoria's face, quickly followed by suspicion. What do you want? I want you to understand something fundamental about achievement and worth. I leaned back in the chair, finally comfortable. I want you to recognize that success isn't always visible, that kindness matters more than China patterns, and that family should never be divided by imaginary hierarchies. I tapped the papers in front of her. I'm prepared to offer you a refinance at a fixed rate, well below current market value. Your monthly payment would actually decrease by about $400. Why would you do that? Keith asked, bewildered. Because despite everything, Victoria is my sister. Because Mason and Madison are my niece and nephew. Because I don't believe in using financial power to crush people, even when they've spent years trying to crush my spirit. I looked directly at Victoria. But I need to know you understand what happened here today. I need to hear you acknowledge it. Victoria's perfect composure crumbled. Tears streaked her makeup, and her hands trembled as she set down the papers. I've been horrible to you, she whispered. For years. I made you sit at a kid's table in your own family because I was so focused on looking successful that I couldn't see actual success standing right in front of me. Keep going, I said gently. I was jealous, Victoria admitted, her voice breaking. You had Autumn, and she's incredible. Smart and kind and loyal. My kids barely look up from their screens. You were happy, genuinely happy, even without the big house and fancy cars. I had all these things I thought mattered, and I still felt empty, so I tried to make you feel small to make myself feel bigger. Mom was crying now. Dad had his hand on her shoulder, his own eyes damp. I'm so sorry, Victoria continued. I'm sorry for every dismissive comment, every time I made you feel less than, every moment I prioritized appearances over being a decent human being. You deserved better. Autumn deserved better. Our whole family deserved better than my behavior. I reached across the table and took my sister's hand. I forgive you. But things have to change, Victoria. Really change, not just for tonight because you're scared about your mortgage. They will, she promised. I swear they will. I'll be better. Then we'll draw up new loan papers next week. Fixed rate, 30-year term, payment reduction as promised. I squeezed her hand. And maybe we can start having real family dinners, where everyone sits together and nobody's worth is measured by their portfolio or their zip code. Victoria nodded, still crying. Keith looked shell-shocked but relieved. The twins watched with something like awe, seeing their mother vulnerable for perhaps the first time. Autumn leaned against my shoulder. You planned this, she whispered. You knew she'd do something awful, and you were ready. I hoped she wouldn't, I murmured back. But I prepared for the possibility that she would. That's what good financial planning teaches you, hope for the best but prepare for every contingency. Dad cleared his throat. I think we should clear this table and start over. Have our Thanksgiving dinner together, all of us, the way it should have been from the beginning. I'll make fresh coffee, Mom said, standing. The good stuff, and the good cups, for everyone. Victoria wiped her eyes and stood as well. I'll help. She looked at me, really looked at me, like she was seeing me for the first time. Will you tell me about your company? How you built it? I want to know everything I've been too self-absorbed to ask about. I'd like that, I said. We reset the table, bringing out more of the good china, setting places for everyone at the main table. The card table got folded and put away, hopefully forever. Mason and Madison actually put down their phones and helped, asking Autumn questions about school and her plans for college. As we settled back in, crowded together but genuinely together, Victoria raised her wine glass. A toast, she said, her voice still thick with emotion. To my sister, who is far more accomplished than I ever gave her credit for, who showed me more grace than I deserved, and who just taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. To Aunt Natalie, Madison added, surprising everyone. The coolest person at this table. We clinked glasses, and I caught Autumn's eye across the table. She was grinning, proud and happy. This was the lesson I'd wanted her to learn, that dignity doesn't require retaliation, that strength can be quiet, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply being excellent and waiting for the right moment to prove it. Victoria and I talked late into the evening after everyone else had moved to the living room. She asked questions about my business, about the challenges I'd faced, about how I'd managed everything while raising Autumn alone. I shared stories I'd never told anyone in my family, about the long nights studying for certifications, the risks I'd taken, the clients who'd become friends. I wasted so much time, Victoria said quietly. So much energy trying to look successful instead of actually building something meaningful. You're not old, I reminded her. You have time to shift priorities, to figure out what really matters. I want to be someone my kids are proud of, she said. Not because of what I own, but because of who I am. Then be that person, I said simply. Starting tomorrow, and every day after. When Autumn and I finally left that night, Victoria hugged me at the door, a real hug that lasted more than a polite second. Thank you, she whispered. For not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. You're my sister, I said. That means something to me, even when it hasn't always seemed to mean something to you. Driving home, Autumn scrolled through the loan documents I'd let her photograph. This is incredible, Mom. You basically orchestrated the perfect lesson. I orchestrated an opportunity, I corrected. What Victoria did with it was her choice. She could have doubled down on her nastiness. Instead, she chose accountability and change. Do you really think she'll be different? I think she'll try, I said. And that's a start. Real change takes time, but tonight was a beginning. The holidays that followed were different. Victoria called regularly, asking about my work and Autumn's activities with genuine interest. She invited us over for dinner without any dramatic seating arrangements, and she stopped mentioning the cost of everything she owned. Keith's promotion came through in February, but instead of upgrading their lifestyle, they refinanced their cars and started building a real emergency fund. Mason and Madison began spending weekends with us occasionally, enjoying the simpler rhythm of our lives. Madison told me once that she'd never realized how stressed their house had been until she experienced a home where people weren't constantly performing success. The mortgage refinancing went through smoothly. Victoria made every payment on time, even sending thank you notes with the first few checks, as if I were doing her a favor rather than conducting a normal business transaction. In a way, though, I was doing her a favor. I was giving her the chance to rebuild our relationship on honest ground. By the following Thanksgiving, the transformation was remarkable. Victoria hosted again, but the dinner was different in every way that mattered. She cooked the meal herself with Mom's help. The table setting was lovely but not ostentatious. Everyone sat together from the start, no divisions or hierarchies. I'm grateful for family, Victoria said during our pre-meal tradition of sharing thanks. Especially for sisters who love you enough to show you when you've lost your way. Autumn squeezed my hand under the table. I smiled at my daughter, at my sister, at my family gathered together in genuine warmth rather than obligatory tolerance. The best victories weren't about humiliation or crushing your enemies. They were about opening doors for change, extending grace while maintaining boundaries, and believing people could grow. I'd sat at a card table and smiled while being dismissed and diminished. Then I delivered the lesson Victoria needed in the kindest way possible, by showing her that true power lies not in looking down on others, but in lifting yourself up through genuine achievement and using that success to help rather than hurt. The envelope I carried that day contained more than mortgage papers. It held the truth about who I'd become while Victoria was busy performing who she wanted others to think she was. It demonstrated that quiet strength often accomplishes more than loud boasting, and that patience combined with preparation creates opportunities for justice that feels satisfying precisely because it's merciful. Victoria would spend years repaying that mortgage, and hopefully every payment would remind her of the day she learned that achievement isn't about the size of your house or the price of your china. It's about the person you build yourself into when nobody's watching, the character you develop through challenge, and the grace you extend even to those who've shown you none. I forgave my sister, but I never forgot the lesson that day taught both of us. Victoria learned humility and the true meaning of success, while I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't always require confrontation. Sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply being prepared, staying calm, and letting the truth speak louder than any argument ever could. That Thanksgiving evening, sitting at a card table I hadn't chosen, I gave my sister a gift more valuable than any refinanced mortgage. I gave her the mirror she needed to see herself clearly, and the grace to change what she saw.